we do have some stuff to show some of them, but it's not comparable for other regions. We know very few about plant-host interactions, although local knowledge about parasites in Latin America is really solid in terms of health consequences to the populations, but in terms of ecological consequences, we still at the first step. And interactions among fungi and plant fungi and among microorganisms, this is terra incognita. We need to study this kind of interaction. What we do know for sure is that these ecological interactions fuel biodiversity. So here's an example. This is a plate with some plants, just the fruits of some plants in an island nearby where I live in São Paulo, Ilha do Cardoso. And this diversity of colors, form, shape, and structures are related essentially to how interactions with organisms shape those fruits and shape those plants through the evolutionary history of that. So interactions create selective pressures. Selection fosters local adaptation. Different populations of plants change because of different animals consuming their fruits, for example. This local adaptation can create diversification. Different populations of species will drive distantly to each other and become more and more different until they become different species. And this will increase biodiversity. So by having many species and many interactions, there is a mechanism that can generate even more species in those sites. And this leads to the emergence of those species-rich networks. Each point here is a species. The links describe interactions among species. In this particular network, I'm describing interactions between animals that consume fruits and the plants that produce fruits, fruiting plants, okay? So the red circles here are the animals, the green circles are the plants, and there is 300 species. This is a region in the Atlantic forest, a site in the Atlantic forest. So, and this, by looking at this figure, I cannot get many information of that, many sites, but the only thing I can only learn from this figure by itself is that there is complexity. Yeah, look like a mess, but we can use tools that were developed by different groups, different scientific fields to actually measure and characterize the structure of those networks. This is a problem that many different areas face in the past, isn't it? Like it starts with people from social scientists, social scientists that describe social interaction among people. Mathematicians were interested just in how objects connected by links are organized. People from physics were start to explore the organization of the internet in the end of the 90s. And then this creates a new scientific field that people call today network science that actually can contribute to different fields, different other scientific fields by allowing to describe this messy structure in terms of quantitative descriptors that you can make, that may generate some insights. So let's take a look in the structure of ecological networks now. So we look to this complex structure, and I will focus. The first thing I would like to illustrate is the fact that the possibilities of different structural patterns are endless. So on average, we have like 30 plant species producing fruits in a given site in the world, on average. At least our data sets today suggest that. And we have about 20 animal species that feed on fruits in that site. These numbers in Latin America are much higher, can be an order of magnitude higher than that. But in other places like in Southern Europe or in more temperate zones, this will be very low. Okay, so on average is that. With just 50 species, if you can imagine that one plant can interact with an animal or not interact, there is only two possibilities, you can end up with 2 power to 651 possible combinations of structure. This is 10 to 196 possible combinations. This number is astronomical. In fact, it's not astronomical. This number is much larger than the number of electrons in the observable universe. So when I say that the combinations are endless, they are truly endless for any particular scale that is related to our human experience. Okay? So we will need to simplify and measure things that can allow us to identify general patterns. By doing so, we need to simplify because the number of combinations is so enormous. So I would like to talk about some of those structural patterns that are very general in ecology, and some of them are observed in other types of networks, in social networks, for example, technological networks, and so on. So the first one is we call the small world effect. Is the fact that if you have an ecological network, like this network describing predator-prey interactions in the Amazon forest, the distance in terms of links that goes from the herbivore to the top predator, or mesocarnivores, or even to the producers, the plants, this number of links that you need to move, this number is always small, very small. Okay, if you have 500 species in a given ecological community, with 3, 4, 5 steps, you go from the plant in the bottom of the ecological network to the top predator at max. Okay, so this is called small world effect because it was first identified in social systems when the notion that you are just 3 or 6. The classical story is about six degrees of separation of every other person in your social group. Sometimes it's much smaller than that. Another general pattern that we observe in ecological networks is what we call modularity, the formation of groups. So here we have, this is the work by Camila Donati, a former student, PhD student here in Stanford, on the Rodolfo supervision. Each node there is an animal or a plant species in the Pantanal, an open flooded area in Brazil and Paraguay. And the links, again, are animals that consume fruits produced by plants. And the colors identify different groups, different communities of organisms that interact more with them than with other groups. This formation of groups is a universal pattern that we observe in ecological networks and also in other types of networks. And finally, the networks in ecology, they come in 2 different flavors. There is 2 basic different organizations that we can observe in an ecological system. Or the system is disconnected, is a set of pairwise or small groups of interacting species, like the interaction between plants and some insects that create galls in the plants, like these structures in the leaves, or, for example, ants that live inside the plants. Or we have a single network that something could cascade to the entire network, as we observe in predator-prey interactions and in seed dispersal and pollination systems, specifically in Latin America. These 2 structural forms, they can be interpreted as 2 phases separated by a phase transition, like ice and water, like iron and a magneto. And this is not a metaphor. The underlying theory that describes why a network is disconnected or why it's connected is also a theory that describes phase transitions in very physical terms. that will be very similar to the transition between iron and magnetite. So here is the plot I would like to explain. I will not go to the underlying details of how this transition works. I'm more than glad to talk about that with any of you after the talk. But by now, we can imagine that here, the x-axis, we have a parameter that is like a turning parameter. If we are talking about iron and magneto, or ice and water, this will be temperature. Here, you are moving from distributions that have a low average of interactions per species, but also has a low variance. All species have about the same number of interactions. When you increase, what you're increasing is the variance in the number of interactions per species. So you get some species that interact with everybody, with dozens, hundreds of species in that place. So this is what it is describing. And here is how many species are in the largest group that is connected, that you could walk from node to node through links. Okay? So the red are the networks that are predicted by the theory for random graphs, that is the formal name of theory, to be connected. And as positive is this value, more sure you are that the network will form a single structure that you could move through the links from one node to another, one species to another. Okay? If you have negative values, and those values negatives are never so negative, they are just around here, the network ends up disconnected. Okay? So, and these circles are empirical systems, most of them from Latin America. When I talk about pollination and seed dispersal systems in Latin America, they are real here. They're always connected. There is always a pathway among species in these systems. We do not know if any tropical systems are like that. Okay? Because we do not have a lot of data from tropical systems outside Latin America. But the fact is that especially pollination and seed dispersal systems will be on the top of this plot, which means that there is pathways connecting species. And this will be very important when we talk about dynamics. These networks are connected, as I mentioned here, because you have some species that interact with hundreds of other species. These species are very special. We call them in the literature super generalists, but those are actually species that rely upon diversity to exist. They rely upon lifestyles that rely upon multiple other species. You cannot have a top predator as the forest falcon without dozens of different potential prey in a forest. You cannot have this kind of tanager that rely upon fruits without hundreds of, or dozens at least, plants producing fruits all over the year. You cannot have big herbivores without some diversity of plants. You cannot have a plant that is so dominant as the palmito is in the Atlantic forest without a coterie, a group of seed dispersed species that rely upon these organisms. And the same is true, of course, for stingless bees there, and for organisms as the black vulture that rely upon carrion from multiple other organisms to exist. So those species connect the system. They are creating the network. Without them, the network will be just a set of disconnected groups. Here, because of this species, there are not many of them, okay? For example, for pollination systems, there will be about 3%, 6% of the species who could be described as super generalists. So it's a small fraction of diversity, but it creates this unique network that involves hundreds of species in a given site. But what are the dynamical consequences of a network? Here I would like to illustrate some of the results that are related to things that we do in my lab. And nothing this will be possible without this group of, this is the small subset of the people that have been working together from the last 15 years. people from different countries, different backgrounds, different interests, but together we have been trying to explore the ecological and evolutionary dynamics of the species-rich networks, always using Latin America as a study system, in particular Atlantic forest in Brazil. Although we do work with other systems too. What we do is try to combine ecological data and natural history information for those species, approaches that are derived from information theory and statistical mechanics that are quite similar actually one with other, and very simple evolutionary and ecological models. Those models are very simple, they are very minimal, they are not realistic in any sense of trying to describe every detail of nature. But when we talk about models and theory in science, it's always interesting to remind that the aim of a model is not to capture every detail of your system. Your system has all the detail that you want, isn't it? It's similar to some forms of art that try to describe reality without being realistic. So this is one of my favorite sentences about that by George Alcoffey, that nothing is less real than realism. Details are confusing. It's only by selection, by elimination, by emphasis that you can get at the real meaning of things. So meaning here I will translate for me as an insight about how ecological systems behave. Okay, if all details, imagine 300, 50, 500, 1,000 species, all details matter, it's really impossible to get any understanding about it. In here, we have been approaching the problem of the dynamical consequences of network structure to biodiversity in two ways. First one is thinking about processes that cascade through the system in a dissipative way. The second way is processes that increase as they progress in the system, as they flow in the system. And then the first one behaves as the telephone game. So the idea of telephone game is that, I think everybody knows what this kind of game, isn't it? Like we call in Portuguese telefone sem fio, although all telephones today has no, yeah, but you still calling that, that's funny, telefone sem fio. So the kids are telling the word, and they need to pass the words through, and the probability of the word gets to the end, the case of the number of the kids of how bad behavior the kids are. So assuming that the bad behavior is a random variable, this will essentially be a function of the length of the chain of children, correct? So this is the information here, in terms of information theory, information is deteriorated through the length of the pathway. And this is very ubiquitous, again, in ecology. Many of the ecological processes behave like that. The most simple example is how energy flow in ecosystems. Life is a thermodynamic system, and as any thermodynamic system, energy, by flowing to the system, part of the energy is lost as heat, isn't it? You cannot use this energy anymore to do work. So, but the thing is that in a network, there is a few pathways that are directed. Because they are directed, they're supposed to be strong. Like the first kid in the chain of children in the telephone game. They probably will get the word correctly. But then you have many more indirect pathways. And as long as the pathway, more pathways you have, although the likelihood of the effect gets you there, decay. So what matters most? A few direct interactions among the species, of hundreds or thousands of indirect interactions that are all weak by definition. Okay, so there is an approach to do that, and one approach that we have been using is based on compute a structural aspect of the network called pathway proliferation. The notion that there is many more indirect pathways than direct pathways in any network that you can study. So this is one of those studies with Sergio Ivan Perez and Matias Pires. We are studying the collapse of food web in Patagonia after the arrival of humans there. There is a huge cultural diversity in Argentina in that time. And in Patagonia, there is this population of hunters that hunt specifically this species of camel called guanaco. But other species as well. So it creates links in the network, and you know that by archaeological sites. So if you compute the number of interactions, and this is the number of interactions that we have that humans increase in the system. So this is the total number of links that the network have, the food web have, and then the red bar describes the addition because humans were there, okay? This is the direct. And those are the indirect pathways. So humans are linking to other predators like the saber-toothed cats through a common prey. So this will be this increase. In the dashed area that involve humans and guanacos, because we are particularly focused in these pairwise interactions. When you go to three pathways involve three links, like humans feed upon guanacos that are the food of saber-toothed cats that also prey upon the offspring of ground sloths. This increased much more. And note the number of pathways. Here you are about 500 pathways, and the number of direct pathways is less than 100. So we have what we call pathway proliferation. And you can look to the structure of the network and measure how much indirect pathways there are. To do so, we use linear algebra. We describe the network as a matrix. So the nodes are rows and columns. There is a 1 there. There is a link here. There is a 0 if there is not a link. Okay? And you can compute the descriptor of this matrix. That's called the leading eigenvalue. Eigenvalue, in Portuguese we call alto valor, which means a number that is characteristic for the matrix. It's the same word. Eigen means the same in German. And so this number will describe, the larger this number, the larger is the number of pathways, indirect pathways that the network has. Okay? So when we move from this network to that network, we can measure that directly, computing the eigenvalue. And this will create an accumulation of pathways. And by consequence, each species will affect each other species with a higher probability in any given model that you try to simulate. Okay? So if you simulate that is a telephone game, so it's a dissipative effect, you may have this matrix. This is a matrix describing interactions among plants and animals. The hotter the color, the stronger the interaction, and you can see very few direct interactions here. But then through a set of matrix operations, you can compute the matrix that describe all the effects through direct and indirect pathways. Again, I will not go to the details here, but later I can talk if you guys are interested. This matrix is, the -1 means that the matrix is the inverse of a matrix that describes a matrix that behaves as a 1, the identity matrix, minus the matrix of interactions. And as you can see here, the matrix, the network is fully integrated. There is no white cell in this matrix. There is some very weak interactions with blue, but everybody may affect everybody in those systems. Okay? And this is because we have those highly connected species linking groups in these species-rich networks. And this approach is very general. It is discovered over and over, he discovered over and over again in different scientific fields. Is the underlying the basic ideas of influence in social networks, the cat centrality descriptor that is underlying the Google bot searches that we use today. It's Wassily Leontiev was awarded a Nobel Prize in economy to using the same matrix to compute to generate the input-output analysis in the economy to the heart of the circular economy. We have been using that to describe flow of energy, evolution, co-extinctions, and even during the COVID pandemics, we used that approach together with some institutions in Brazil, including the state of São Paulo, the city of São Paulo, and the army, to try to predict which areas are more vulnerable to COVID-19 and to SARS-CoV than others in Brazil. To finish, now let's talk about amplifying cascading effects that increase as they propagate in the system. Like the one that I started to talk, illustrating the importance of interactions to diversity. So you remove just a few RP eagles because they are never abundant. They are top predators. The monkey population increases a bit, change their behavior, and the consequence is the collapse of one of the most abundant plants in the forest. So the effect is increasing as they propagate to the system. It's like a snowball effect. It's really hard to describe, to model the snowball effects. We are just starting to explore these ideas together with Carlos Melian from ELAG in Lucerne, Switzerland. And we are using Boolean networks to explore them. Boolean network models are models in which the interactions are associated with logical rules. So if there is one, I will illustrate that in a moment. And each node in the system can be on or off. I'd like to illustrate using the example of the capuchin monkey, the palmito, and the predators. So imagine that if the predators are present on, the population of capuchin monkey is not extinct, but is off in the sense they are not out of control, okay? But then you go there and kill all the predators. To kill all the predators, there is no, what we call in ecology, top-down control of the capuchin monkey. The population increases. Now the capuchin monkey is on. If it's on, the palmito is off. So these kind of rules, if something is on, the other is off. This is the logical rules, the Boolean rules that we are using, and the states are on and off. And now we are trying to apply this approach. We are just starting to apply this approach to very complex networks with hundreds of species. We will be very, from a theoretical point of view, this will be really hard to do it. What we know, based on previous studies, as the key of the behavior of the system will depend at least partially on network structure. So this is the work of Marilia, who is in the audience, that using a Boolean network model, she explored the consequences of different aspects of network structure to the way a co-extinction effect propagates to the system. So how this effect propagates to an ecological network. And this will depend on the number of species. The higher the number of species, the more slow is the propagation of the cascade. Depends on the formation of the groups. So if the network is formed in groups, each group dump the propagation of the effect, making the cascading effect propagate more slowly, and so on. Okay, so we hope that structure will provide a key to understand dynamics. To finish, I will talk briefly about the consequences of human activities for networks, ecological networks, and vice versa. So one of the more fundamental consequences of humans, oh my God, this will be fun. It will be a tragedy, but it will be fun. It will create a cascading effect. Just follow a domino effect. It's another way of calling a cascading effect, isn't it? So one consequence of humans is to simplify complexity. So it's the first consequence that we got. Like humans arrive in Patagonia, and this food web, as we call this ecological network, lost a module. The module of the big game, the big mammals. Just to have, imagine in Patagonia, alone has more large mammals than all Africa and Asia together today, in terms of number of species. More mammals with more than hundreds of kilos, including some with 1,000 kilos. The same in the Amazon forest. Nowadays, we are lost in the top levels of the network, the top layers, the top predators, and the network is simplifying. As a consequence, by changing these interactions, we may not only humans are changing the ecology, by changing the networks, humans will affect themselves. Okay? So, for example, again, with this example here, if you kill the predators, you kill the palm, and as a consequence, you kill several ecosystem services associated with that particular palm that human populations rely upon. This includes the fruits. Acai, for example, is from a close related plant species, the same genus. Okay, so this is kind of the acai of Atlantic forest. Acai is from the Amazon forest. The palm heart that people harvest there. The frugivorous birds that people go there to do bird watching, they will disappear because they rely upon fruits. Several other plant products related from the palm, and also cultural aspects, like some myths of the indigenous populations of the region that rely on the presence of those organisms that will disappear. So humans are affected by the collapse of this complexity simplification that we get by human activities. But those are not only changes that humans do in ecosystems. Here, for example, are the interactions between plants and frugivorous, fruit-eating animals across the globe. This, as you can see the geographical structure of the globe here, because these are the native interactions. And that network there, we are including the invasive species, the alien species that are moved towards the globe by humans. Look that we are just erasing the geographical structure of these networks. You are creating pathways connecting the entire planet in a way that we have no idea if they will have any effect, any cascading effect flowing through the entire globe. So humans now are just part of the ecosystem. So here is a network in marine coastal Peru. And in this network now, sharks and fishery do almost the same thing. So fishermen behave as sharks in those networks. Top predators feed upon some large fish if they are. So we need to come to ways to understand how this integration will lead to novel ecological networks. And this is central because our cities are actually based upon ecological networks. That all the flow of energy that sustain our lifestyles rely upon natural areas. Imagine just the crop plantations, what will happen if you lost all the pollinators, for example. That will maintain our societies, and some of our societies are pretty big, as the city I came from, São Paulo, where I live, São Paulo. And in fact, this is particularly serious in Latin America, because if you look to the list of the mega cities of Americas and Europe, most of them are in Latin America. The largest cities in the Western world, if you want, are concentrated. 9 out of 12 are in Latin America. So those will rely upon the functioning of natural ecosystem. But there is hope. There is hope about the impact of humans. Humans can also reconstruct networks. So this is my daughter. She is watching a forest in Rio de Janeiro called Floresta da Tijuca, the Tijuca National Park. And this is one of the first successful cases of recreating a forest in the world. In the 70s, in the 18th century, the forest was cleared for plantation and livestock. As a consequence, the city, Rio de Janeiro city, had problems with water. Sometimes we have much water flowing to the hills. Sometimes we have no water at all to the population. So, Emperor Pedro II of Brazil ordered to forest restoration. And then 6 enslaved persons and one major that was particularly interested in plants. They, in 25 years, they plant 100,000 trees, recreating the forest. But they do not create the forest, because until 1970s, there are mixed animals there. The big animals are not, what the forest was essentially a garden with many trees without the animals. And since then, there is a long-term project introducing animals in this place. And we are now trying to understand. This project is led by my friend Alexandra Pires in this work with Pedro Mittelman. We try to explore the consequences of reintroducing these animals to reconnect the system, reconnect plants that are linked to these animals across this forest. So my take-home messages are: Latin America is the mega diverse region of the planet. Ecological interactions shaped and are shaped by biodiversity in Latin America. Ecological interactions form species-rich ecological networks that allow cascading effects to propagate. The network pathways may be fundamental for the resilience of ecosystem services, and we may pursue the protection and restoration of these ecological networks to promote the resilience of Latin America's socio-ecological systems that we depend. I would like to thank the people from my lab, the funding agencies, again, the invitation to talk today here with you and my collaborators. And I am more than glad to get any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for questions. No questions too big or too small, too late or too technical. The floor is open.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I was just curious about whether, what the impact is on humans, maybe introducing something into the network instead of taking it away, like with genetic modification or with like cash crops. Like, how does that affect the network as a whole?
So, we have scant evidence about this type of effect. What we know is that most of the species that are introduced, they do not thrive in ecosystems. Okay, this is first effect. They try to introduce one species, usually does not work. But sometimes work and sometimes the species take over. For the studies on specifically on networks that we have, we have 2 or 3 evidences suggest that those species that are able to take over the entire system, they start in the periphery of the network. So they arrive there, they make some connections, like, for example, some ants start to protect a small set of plants. 10 years later, this ant is like the network hub, is the Google of the system. It's interacting with everybody. We describe it the same way that people describe Google, the same tools that people describe Google in the internet. Okay, it's the same. It's actually the same approach to quantify the importance of a node in a system. It's exactly mathematically will be the same. So apparently there is this trajectory. The species start in the periphery and take over the entire system. What makes one particular species to take over, we still not know. I mean, there is some guesses that are educated guesses, like a species that that in the native area are able to interact with multiple partners. They usually will be highly successful if they can make to the new system. But what makes the species be successful in the new system? This is more hard to understand, or have been harder.
Thank you so much. This was incredible. So I want to share a story of Tijuca when my son was bitten by a monkey there a few years ago. And then the guide that was there told us, "Oh, do not worry. This is a self-contained ecology." He said, "That monkey will not have rabies." No, that was his.
I have to say that
But that is not my actual question. but my question a little bit is on the way campaigns for preserving different animals. So people kind of zero in on a panda or on a vaquita marina in Mexico.
Mhm.
But it seems that the implication of what you've shown us is that there are some species that should be really the ones we zero in, and there might be things that people don't find too attractive or too beautiful or whatever, but that might be so central to the network preservation that we should change the way we adopt an animal. Right?
Yeah, the good thing though is that many of the charismatic species that people really have some are in love of,
Mhm.
they turns to be important species to the ecosystem functioning, like top predators or charismatic large herbivores.
Mhm.
Like when I say that we have this problem with Latin America, that if Latin America is our reference for tropical systems, there is one big problem. Latin America is particularly poor in terms of large mammals, not because they were absent here from the beginning, but because they die out 10,000 years ago. So our largest native animal, the tapir, is smaller than a horse. Okay, so for this kind of system, we really do not know the relevance of the large mammals, although some people are exploring that as I am saying this today. But we know for Africa and for Southern Asia that those large animals are fundamental to the functioning of ecosystem, and they usually are those that the people care about. But there are exceptions, like the monkey that probably bite your children. It's a marmoset, probably. This is an invasive species in the area, and it's killing everything. I mean, it's killing all the nestlings of birds. They feed on eggs. They reproduce with native marmosets and create some gremlin-like creatures that are destroying the local species. So there are exceptions, but usually there is some correlation in how people care about the organisms and the importance of at least some of them. Like, for example, the sea otter here in California, they are particularly, every child loves those, and they are fundamental to kelp forests here, isn't it? Like, so there is some correlation.
My question was like regarding the last part of your talk, where you mentioned the dissipative and amplified effects that it can have in a network. So do you know if there is a way to predict if the effect is going to be dissipated or amplified? Sorry.
People ask me if the effect doesn't change through time. No, so this is highly unlikely. Or if it's 1 point, if like the reproduction of the effect is 0.99 will decay, 1.01 will increase exponentially to the path length, isn't it? So in ecology, I would bet, as best I can do, that most of the effects are truly dissipative because of the thermodynamic nature of life systems. Okay, the effect to increase will depend on some idiosyncratic, that's my take, some idiosyncratic aspects of the natural history of some organisms. But those probably are the most important. So I would say that ideally, if I try to come up with some theoretical map for the problem, I would say, okay, let's assume that everything is dissipative. And let's measure what is not. And now try to understand the departure in terms of the biological features of those organisms. So I'm not answering your question because I don't know the answer, but I would assume that dissipative effects are much more common than amplifying effects, but amplifying effects are much more critical because they from the theoretical point of view, they will move the system to a different fixed point, stable state.
We have time for another round of questions, but because our seminar is also a grounding seminar in Latin American studies, I want to slide in a couple of meta-disciplinary reflections for the benefit of us in the master's program. Note how the kind of mathematical tools that Professor Guimarães is using come from a different domain, right? They come from network theory, they come from the realm of the digital, and all of a sudden knowledge like mutates, right? When someone is writing a paper and says, why don't we apply this instrument to that problem? So methodologically, I think this is really interesting because we see how knowledge is being built, and also imagine the possibilities, because I know that not many of us in the group are working on the ecological narrowly understood, but when you think in terms of the socio-ecological, you could start mapping things like real estate speculation around Tijuca in connection to the species and have a kind of like robust Latourian nature cultural analysis and generate new knowledge. You see, so I just want to make that kind of reflection because this is very exciting to me, and I'm a humanist. You know, I work on text, and I find this fascinating and a lot to cross-pollinate.
And first of all, I cannot emphasize more how important is this interchange of ideas between fields. I think the network science was particularly successful in these last 2 decades because it was very open to do this movement around. It's not the first time that people do that. Like statistics have been doing that for hundreds of years, isn't it? But network science was particularly clear because you describe the systems in a similar way. So it's natural that you come up with some similar description. And this creates novel problems, as you point out. For me, one key aspect now is how we integrate the social networks with the ecological networks and how we can manage the ecological systems to maintain the services that we take for granted from nature, but are depending upon the functioning of those networks. And theoretically, again, this involves a very clear problem, a problem that involves multiple types of networks that are linked to each other, what some people call this multi-layer network, for example. And the big problem is how you translate effects, how you translate cultural behavior, economical value, and effects on the demography of plants and animals. That's what ecology is about, in a single currency that you can translate, you can interchange between them and make a unifying theory that allow you to understand the effects, how the effects go back and forth. I think that's the challenge.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Paulo. That was a fantastic presentation.
Obrigado.
And Hector's comment about the significance beyond sort of the ecological sciences as a humanist. The fact that you mentioned briefly the situation that in the network there is an extension which has to do with the extension of culture, because that's another critical issue. I mean, not only of biology, but also of anthropology and of humanity as a whole. And I suspect that much of the loss of biodiversity will also have implications for the extinction of diversity of cultures. That seems to be a critical factor along the lines of what Hector was saying. So for humanists, for people in the political sciences, that's relevant. My question or comment was about the following. You have described beautifully the complexity in the theory and consequences of network science in natural systems or primitive natural systems. I was wondering what you have in terms of speculations, at least, about agricultural systems or agroecological systems. Because in this plan, we will go from dramatic monocultures, one single species, sometimes even one single genotype, to a very diversified system, like, for example, milk pasturage, right, where you have not one plant, but a multiplicity of plants, with multiple animals there, also involving network science and theory there. Anything that has been done or can be done about that?
Yeah.
Ramification of the network science?
Yeah, I was involved with a very, very interesting project. I learned more than I contribute, to be honest. But so it was very. I learned a lot, so it was fantastic for me. I'm not sure if I could contribute more. With Darren Evans from Newcastle University and Mariano Devoto, the Universidade de Buenos Aires, exactly about these ecological networks in agroecological systems, or even in more agricultural systems, but they are surrounded by some biodiversity. And the fundamental problem that we, at least from my perspective, and I'm not a specialist on that, is that if you go to a monoculture, you end up with a system that, as an ecosystem, a monoculture, rely massively on inflow of energy from other systems. So it's a drain. It's highly productive in terms of generate that particular crop, but you are depending upon an amount of matter and energy that comes from other places, essentially comes from other ecological networks. You can try to if you go to systems that are more diverse, we should expect the system will be more resilient and more independent than monocultures. And there is this side problem that I'm interested on, is that if you have this vegetation that is around the crops, that was the problem that we tackled in this project. That people live there because it's just in defense, of the crop. This actually is providing ecosystem services, and also these services, like they at the same time they are hosting the pollinators, but also the herbivores. So now people start to try to explore if there is some combination of plants, of native plants or ruderal plants, that you can put together near the crop that would maximize, for example, the ecosystem services like pollination, pest control, and will reduce at the same time the river. So which combination would, and the first results that we got was that is impossible, at least for the systems that we explore, to maximize services and minimize these services. So you need to come up with some trade-off. Mm-hmm. And then I think this creates a lot of room for economy to show up and contribute, to try to help which combination would maximize, for example, the crop production together to the maintenance of diversity.
It seems to me that the role of traditional ecological knowledge, actually, by the knowledge of our ancestral communities, might have a significant contribution to the development of this field.
I totally agree. We have evidence that many of those practices, at long term, they maintain not only diversity, but they maintain the functioning of the system and the productivity of the system in the long run.
Thank you. Another question from Professor Domin. I think anyone else? The last word? Yes. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, it was extremely interesting presentation. To me, it was interesting in two levels. On the one hand, the information that you convey is actually extremely important to understand the ecological realities and the dynamics of those ecological systems in our region, that we can actually extrapolate somehow to other regions of the world, and actually it's part of the main issue we have as of now. It's burning also on a few hundred miles south of here, so have to do with what is going on out there. Is affecting the ecosystems of that. And the other level to me that is very interesting is the kind of type that models are using, because in fact, biological systems are the closest to social systems in their level of complexity, and therefore there's a similarity in the type of instruments you can actually use to study them. So I have two questions that come from these two things. On the one hand, given the vulnerability of these ecosystems and the connection that we have with the economic systems and the way in which there will be an impact of the economic practices. Market economies are based on the idea that scarcity is the reason why a resource is valuable in economic terms. So how may that impact and have an impact on ecosystems in which, on the other hand, levels of abundance of the different one of the system may be critical? Or I don't know if you have any thought about that, but I think it's an important question to ask. The market economy and the way we should affect ecosystems based given the foundation of the market economy. And the other question is had to do with the model, because I think you mentioned when you were answering one of the questions that out of the two types of cascade effects that are non-linear cascades, one of them will take the system to a different steady state. That's, I think, you used that exact expression, right?
Yeah.
Are we really talking about steady state systems, or can we talk about systems away from equilibrium, for example, in the EWG kind of model, which is, I know it's for physics, but it can work with this as well.
Yeah.
And that would probably change the perspective on these dynamics.
Yeah. Okay. So for the first part of the answer, the first question, sorry. Humans are a kind of odd type of predator. I would argue that our dominance in terms of ecological dominance, like we can measure dominance by computing the biomass, the amount of mass together of an organism. And for mammal, we are highly dominant. Right? Together with livestock today, we have 96% of the biomass of mammals in the world are humans and cattle. Okay, 96%. 4% for whales, elephants, rodents, bats, everything else. Okay, 4%. So we have this success by two reasons, at least in my biological limited view of the problem. First of one, we forge alliances with several species. We are really good on that. With cattle is one example. With some plant species like rice, soy, we're very successful. Again, this is typical what we call mutualistic interaction, in the sense that both populations benefit from the interaction, they increase in numbers. The second one, we are really good predators. But as predators, we are odd, because we are the only form of predator that kill distance from the prey. This is the only, I mean, there is one snail that can throw something. There's other very odd natural history events, but to kill systematically from distance, we are really going on that. And on top of that, we have this odd behavior that as rare as something is, more we want. As a generalist predator, this is specific of humans. Any generalist predator will feed mainly to a population to almost crash. They will change not because they are thinking in the future, they are not thinking at all, but just because it's becoming very difficult to take this particular form of antelope. Let's kill this other one, isn't it? That's what lionesses do in savannah. They are just moving around, and this actually maintains diversity, because you will never let nobody to extinction, because as the numbers get too low, it's simply not profit to develop hunting skills to kill that particular prey. They need to develop hunting skills. They need to learn how to kill. But humans don't do that. So my take of your first question is that we systematically drive some species to extinction because we're still killing them, especially because they become rare. We have some very odd examples of that in New Zealand, in Europe, in Africa, that we drove species to extinction just because they are rare. The other effect that humans have that other predators don't have is that because we are not carnivores all the time, we behave like ants, like some ants. We feed on plants, so we have huge populations, but we systematically eat other animals. As a consequence, we do not depend on the animals to maintain big populations. There is no negative feedback. If a predator like a lynx kill a lot of hares, rabbits in a place, the population will go down, the of limits go down, the population of the rabbit or the hare increase, and they will cycle. This is the classical first example in ecology of cycle. It's a limited cycle. But with humans, if you do not negative feedback, you can just drive everything to extinction. Like you kill one baby elephant every year by a ceremony, and then if your population is big enough, you drive elephants to extinction. You don't need to systematically kill them because of that. But we do. Like we just go there, and as hare elephants or rhinoceros become more, they are available. So we are driving all the rhinoceros species to extinction, but one until the end of December. So that's something that I agree with it is intrinsically have an impact of reduced complexity in the system. About your question on steady states, we assume that from the beginning that life systems are out of equilibrium. Thermodynamically is a system out of equilibrium, okay? Because but it's a kind of odd out of equilibrium system because life is possible because there is the sun. So the sun provides all the energy, or almost all energy to living systems. And once you have that coming, and assuming time scales that are short enough, then you can try to compute steady states for the system as it was a closed system. Okay. But so we are not truly using out of equilibrium thermodynamical models to explore the problem. We say, okay, it's took for granted that the sun is still behaving like that for at least more than a century, and then let's try that. Let's analyze the system as a closed system. Simplify a lot.
Let's make time for one quick question and maybe one quick answer if possible.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't want to take up too much time, but I guess the elephant in the room is climate change. Like, what is it doing to all these networks and so on and so on. And then the other one, very quickly, so you mentioned geological time. South America used to be its own continent. What kinds of dinosaurs existed at that time?
Oh my God!
Yeah, I guess those are big questions, but yeah.
I can talk. The mammals are much more interesting than dinosaurs for South America. But there is one nice. Okay, so climate change. Being fast, we are starting to understand the consequence. The big problem with climate change in terms of networks, not the big, but one of the biggest problems is they will shift how the biodiversity. So the main response of any species in geological time to climate change is move away. That's the easiest one. If you go to geological record, they are just moving north and south because of changes in temperature. They do that. But now we cannot move because everything is fragmented. So this will make difficult to biodiversity to just move up and down. And in some places, like in Europe, there is one very interesting study. Much of the deciduous parcel, this is the system I studied most, rely upon migratory birds. They go south in the winter and then move back in the summer. But depending on how climate is changing, these migration routes will be disrupted, and this may lead to the collapse of local communities of plants because the birds never show up. So for me, the big problem of climate change in these particular aspects is that the scale of change is much larger than the scale that we actually are able to maintain biodiversity, like the parks that we have. And this will imply that we need to find ways to connect the places through land bridges, for example, that allows biodiversity to move back and forth. About the South America, splendid isolation. This is the name of a paleontological book by G.G. Simpson, that was the main paleontologist, one of the people that contributed to build up the synthesis of evolutionary theory. He was particularly in love with South America and Central America. About dinosaurs, we never get tyrannosaurs there. That's so odd. We have different carnivores, but we have really big ones. Like in Argentina, they have the largest dinosaurs ever recorded from Argentina. As a Brazilian, this is really hard to say. I'm joking. I love Argentina. I do most of the. Apparently, the birds that survived to the meteor are from South America. Apparently, South America was one of the places that was less heated by the big Cretaceous extinction, because the meteor apparently hit in an angle that protected South America from the impact. So the birds were die out all over the place, but in South America they were able to survive. And then as in mammals, that was impressive. I mean, the mammals evolved very odd forms, like the ground sloths, for example, like giant armadillos and things like that. And the main predator was a bird close related to a bird that is still roaming to South America, called Seriema. This is a bird like that. But this bird was really big, and it feed upon small horse-like mammals. So, and when they create the bridge, there is an interchange. Most of the species of mammals that we associate today to Latin America come from the north, like jaguars, tapirs, coatis, monkeys. Monkeys may come from Africa, we don't know. But some goes up, like the ground sloths were highly successful here until the arrival of humans. And then all the big mammals die out, both in north and south.
It is time for closing announcements. First, to express our thanks to Professor Guimarães for this amazing talk. Thank you also for bearing with the technological difficulties. We're setting up the system for the quarter. Next week, January 17th at 1:30 p.m., we'll have a lecture entitled U.S.-Cuba Relations Before and After a Watershed Election. Our thinker visiting Professor Ernesto Lopez. This is in collaboration with the Cuba Observatory, directed by Professor Wolf. And if you would all have a few minutes to join us for a toast, we have to celebrate many things. Your talk, to welcome new members of our community, to say farewell to Professor Ana Figueiredo, who's leaving us sadly, and also to celebrate Botao's his birthday. Thank you very much.
Estaba muy